Please, don't hurt me. I can't walk.
She whispered, unaware that the people she feared most were her own family. A single dim light flickered above the hospital bed, throwing pale shadows across the room. The air was heavy with antiseptic and the soft hum of machines. A frail woman lay motionless beneath the sheets, her face etched with fear and exhaustion. Her body no longer responded to her will. The memory of twisted metal, shattered glass, and screaming tires still haunted her every breath. That woman was Lucy Sterling, and the people responsible for her broken body were the very ones who once smiled at her across the family dinner table. Months earlier, Lucy had been a bright, hopeful art teacher whose world revolved around color and creation. She'd never imagined that her love story would cross paths with one of the most powerful families in the city. When she met Christopher Sterling, the billionaire heir to the Sterling conglomerate, she found kindness behind the wealth, a gentle man who admired her simple dreams. Their connection blossomed quickly, and soon they stood together before the world, united by love. But not everyone saw it that way. Christopher's family, his cold, calculating mother Helen, his ambitious sister Natasha, and his reckless brother Kevin, saw Lucy as a parasite. They whispered at dinner parties, smirked during interviews, and muttered behind closed doors. To them, she was a gold digger who didn't belong among people of status. Yet Christopher, blinded by affection, ignored their scorn. He vowed to protect Lucy, believing love would eventually soften their hearts. For a brief time, happiness bloomed. Lucy filled their penthouse with warmth, painting canvases that captured the sunrise over the city skyline. Christopher's laughter echoed through their home, and even the sterile walls of wealth began to feel alive. But envy has a way of festering in silence. The more the Sterlings saw Lucy's joy, the deeper their resentment grew. Then came the accident. It was a bright morning, and Lucy had been on her way to a charity art exhibition. Her car, freshly serviced the day before, glided smoothly down the highway, until it didn't. In an instant, the brakes failed. The steering wheel locked. The world spun into chaos. Metal collided, glass shattered, and then silence. When she woke, the white lights above her head seemed to pierce straight through her soul. The doctor's voices blurred into one dreadful truth: she would never walk again. While Christopher wept beside her bed, his family watched with cold politeness. They spoke of tragedy and fate, of how unfortunate it was that such a thing happened. Beneath their words, there was a glimmer of cruel satisfaction, one Lucy was too kind to notice. Christopher stayed by her side for months, feeding her hope and promising recovery. But business eventually pulled him away. His company teetered on the brink of financial crisis, forcing him to travel abroad for urgent meetings. With tenderness, he asked Lucy to stay in the family mansion while he was gone, assuring her it would be safer than living alone. She hesitated, but his sincerity left no room for refusal. So she agreed, believing his family would finally accept her. The day she arrived, the mansion's doors opened like the gates of a gilded prison. The grandeur was suffocating: marble floors, golden chandeliers, and portraits of ancestors who looked as stern as the people who greeted her. The staff avoided her gaze, their politeness brittle and rehearsed. Helen greeted her with a frozen smile. Natasha stood by the staircase, arms crossed, and Kevin Smirk said more than any words could. Days passed, and the cruelty began to reveal itself. Meals arrived cold or not at all. Lucy's medication mysteriously disappeared. Her wheelchair was left at the far end of the hall, forcing her to drag herself towards it. When she tried to reach Christopher, her phone had accidentally vanished. She was surrounded by luxury, but stripped of dignity. The mansion became a silent battlefield, where her spirit was the target. Helen commanded the staff not to help her, claiming she needed to build strength. Natasha treated her suffering like sport, tossing cruel remarks about her condition. Kevin's laughter echoed as he pretended to stumble, spilling hot tea dangerously close to her lap. What once felt like a home now felt like a tomb, every hallway echoing with whispers of malice. One stormy night, as thunder rolled beyond the mansion walls, Lucy's world shifted again. From the shadows of her room, she overheard the voices that froze her blood. Helen's tone was sharp, deliberate, stripped of any pretense. She spoke of the accident, of how they had bribed a mechanic to tamper with the brakes. It wasn't fate that had crippled her. It was murder. Natasha's voice followed, cold and casual, suggesting that the job remained unfinished. One push down the stairs, she said, and the problem would finally disappear. Terror gripped Lucy, but beneath the fear flickered something stronger, resolve. She knew escape was impossible, but evidence might be her salvation. Over the next few days, she played the role they wanted, defeated, hopeless, broken. She pretended to be sedated, her eyes vacant, her movements slow. When Natasha mocked her for being useless, Lucy simply stared through her, all while quietly memorizing the layout of the house and watching for chances. Finally, one night, she wheeled herself silently into Natasha's room while the house slept. Her trembling hands rifled through drawers until she found the proof. Printed emails detailing payments to the mechanic, photographs of her wrecked car, and messages dripping with guilt. She knew these could expose them all, but fate, cruel and watchful, intervened. Natasha walked in, eyes narrowing as realization dawned. In an instant, her face twisted with fury. That night, the plan was accelerated. Helen and Kevin joined Natasha in the grand hall, their whispers blending with the sound of rain against the windows. Lucy was wheeled to the edge of the staircase that spiraled downward like the throat of a beast. Kevin's hands tightened on the chair's handles. Helen leaned forward, eyes blazing with hatred. And Lucy, heart hammering, understood that this was where her life was meant to end. For a fleeting second, she thought of Christopher, his smile, his faith and love, his promise that she'd never be alone. But promises couldn't save her now. The chair tilted and gravity took hold. The world dissolved into motion, her body weightless, her scream lost in the rush of air. Then came the impact, a deafening crack of pain and then darkness. But fate had one last twist left. The silence shattered as the mansion doors burst open, heavy footsteps echoed, followed by the cold authority of law enforcement. Christopher appeared rain-soaked and breathless, his eyes burning with fury and grief. He had returned earlier than planned, guided by the gnawing suspicion that something was wrong. Hidden cameras he'd installed before leaving had captured every moment of the family's cruelty, every insult, every plan, every attempt on Lucy's life. As Helen, Natasha, and Kevin stood frozen in shock, police officers surrounded them. In that instant, all their arrogance crumbled. Christopher rushed to Lucy's side, his hands shaking as he tried to reach her. The woman who had been treated as worthless now held the evidence that would destroy them all. The trial that followed captivated the nation. The Sterling family name, once synonymous with wealth and prestige, became a symbol of corruption and greed. Helen received 25 years for attempted murder, Natasha 20 years for conspiracy, Kevin 18. The mechanic who tampered with Lucy's car confessed and was sentenced to 10. The empire they had protected with deceit collapsed overnight. Christopher, devastated but resolute, renounced his family fortune. He transferred everything he owned into Lucy's name and walked away from the legacy he had been born into. Together, they built something new, not out of marble and money, but out of compassion and truth. He founded a charity in her name, dedicated to helping survivors of accidents and abuse, while Lucy began painting again, pouring her pain and hope onto canvas. Months later, in a quiet rehabilitation center, Lucy's body began to respond in ways doctors couldn't explain. A tingling sensation spread through her legs, faint but unmistakable. Day after day, she worked through the pain, her determination fierce and unwavering. Christopher stood by her side through every session, his hand clasped around hers, his faith unbroken. And then one morning, As sunlight streamed through the window, Lucy arose. Her knees trembled, her breath caught, but she stood. Tears fell freely as she took one hesitant step, then another. The room erupted in applause from the therapists and staff, but Lucy heard only Christopher's quiet sob of joy. They left the mansion behind, selling it to erase the ghosts of cruelty that had haunted its halls. Their new home was smaller, simpler, a cottage near a lake, surrounded by wildflowers. Lucy set up a small art studio there, her paintings filled with light and renewal. She painted sunsets that glowed like forgiveness, and portraits that captured the strength born from suffering. Christopher devoted his life to the foundation they had built, visiting hospitals and rehabilitation centers, sharing Lucy's story as proof that hope could survive even the darkest betrayal. The world saw them not as victims, but as symbols of resilience, of love